Okay, so I'd like to now talk more in depth about the program and its structure and the different components of it. There are four components of the program. Some of these have been from the launch of the program, and some have been developed as we refine the program in the first few years. So first you heard, and I think this is wonderful that you just heard Patrick and Johanna speak. You heard about the spiritual care and counseling, the SCC courses. And then you also heard them talk about the CPE internship. And CPE stands for Clinical Pastoral Education. And it's an internship program which is accredited, which was started in 1924. So just over 100 years ago. There's a wonderful history of this field. But at the time in American history in which experiential education was really first being um, developed and envisioned, John Dewey and others, um, experiential learning was also appealing across the different professions. How people were training to become doctors or to work in business or education or law. Like all of these now, we can't imagine them without human experience, an action reflection method of learning, as well as case studies. But over 100 years ago, that wasn't the case. So anyway, we have a wonderful 100-year history that is part of our program. Before continuing, I wanted to say something about the interaction between the spiritual care courses and the internships. I myself started my chaplaincy career during rabbinical school. I was a student at JTS. I thought I would go into a form of education, perhaps Hebrew school education. And I had a series of required internships, and one of them was called hospital chaplaincy. And when I did the chaplaincy internship and I sat with people during those times of waiting, like waiting from admission to test, taking tests or having a test done and getting the results, or getting the results and making a decision about treatment, or having a treatment and then seeing what the results were. I found that those times were just very meaningful to be with people, or when I've gone through, or my family's gone through health experiences, to have people be with us. I think sometimes when we tell stories in retrospect, we crunch those times, but in live times, those are just such important and often difficult or challenging times. So I entered the field of chaplaincy, and I worked for many years as a hospital chaplain. And during that time, I also felt very drawn to becoming an educator in the field. And so I've also taught in the hospital, and then at JTS when I came back, I've taught our CPE internships. But what I often found in teaching was that sometimes people came very strong in content knowledge, theory and language, sometimes text and references, chapter and verse, so to speak. And so if somebody said to them, like, what's a prayer I could say at this moment, they could think of something off the top of their head. And then other times people came and were very strong in the emotional intelligence, like how something felt, or conveying a sense of empathy or compassion, or what I sometimes call the staying power. They were very comfortable staying present with people during the uncertainty of difficulty and crisis. But sometimes it would happen that people who were good at one struggled with the other, and vice versa. So what we've built here at JTS is a curriculum which is intended to be an integration between the conceptual and the intellectual and the emotional and affective. And so that we're using a pedagogy that believes that it's the integration of the head and the heart. And I'd also say the body, physically showing up for people, that's what actually best prepares us to show up for people during difficult times. So if we now continue with the components of the program, we also have in-person retreats. We've been weaving these into the program, and starting next year, this will become a standard component of the program that twice a year we gather in person for a few days. That's been in August and January, just before the semester starts. And then the final component is the capstone, which you also heard some about. So the capstone, and I'll say more about this, but the capstone is a project in which you have the opportunity to intentionally pull together some of the loose ends and the threads of your experience and bring them together. So this is a 30 credit degree. There are the options to go beyond the 30 if that appeals to you, but in terms of the graduation requirement, everyone must take at least 6 academic courses, which come to 18 credits, do at least 1 CPE unit, and they call the internships in the accreditation process an internship of 400 hours, which is the unit for accreditation, is called a unit of CPE, just in the professional lingo. And JTS issues 6 credits for each internship in CPE. That's a pretty typical amount of academic credit for what seminaries give to CPE. I'll say more about the CPE program as we continue. So 8 credits of courses, 6 credits for CPE, and then 6 credits in electives. And the electives could be another unit of CPE, or it could be 2 more courses or 6 more credits in coursework. So you've already heard about the courses from our 2 wonderful speakers. This is a list of the courses we're offering at this point. All of the courses we offer online, and many of the courses we also offer in person. We don't do hybrid courses, but we sometimes will offer a course twice, an online section and an in-person section. And we are in a time of curriculum expansion, and so it's possible that we'll also develop more coursework beyond these. So let's talk about the CPE internship for a few minutes. As I mentioned, it's 100 years old, and through the experiential learning process, one has the opportunity to actually do the work of chaplaincy. Now, most of the settings are in hospitals, but I do want to emphasize that healthcare chaplaincy is not the only context for participating in this program or the kind of career that it might lead to, or even during the program, we can work with you to create what we would call in the field a clinical setting out of any context that you are working in that enables you to provide spiritual and emotional support to people. In our program, we've had people use educational contexts, universities, advocacy, it's an animal advocacy organization. So, and also prisons and prison reentry organizations. So you have the opportunity to actually, during the program, be doing the work of CPE, of chaplaincy and spiritual care, while you're in the CPE class. You get an introduction to the profession of chaplaincy. And what you learn could be applied in any context. Some people take this training and don't change careers, but they find that it enhances their careers in the professions they work in. The program also, in addition to skill building for caregiving, also has aspects for developing self-awareness as well as self-care practices, because we know that this work is very hard, and we also know that we're living in a very difficult world. There's a lot of challenges, and whether or not we're in a caregiving profession. So that's a component of the educational process. During this process, you work with and learn with people from diverse backgrounds. Our faculty is religiously and denominationally diverse. Our student body, especially in the CPE, in the internship program, is diverse. And most definitely, the people who receive care at our clinical placements also come from diverse backgrounds. Some of that depends on the context. If you have your synagogue, or it could be like a house of worship as the clinical context, that would have less religious diversity. But if you have a placement in a nursing home or a hospital, that's going to have the diversity that that institution has. Um, and you also, through this program, gain a credential by completing an accredited CPE program that in and of itself is part of the credentialing for becoming board certified, or even without the board certification, it's a meaningful credential that is helpful to people in their careers. I won't go into so much here, but this slide is about our program that's both the place that's located in New York City, as well as how we work with clinical sites outside of New York City. So in New York City, we have a variety of hospitals, hospice, elder care programs, and Rikers Island jail and prison reentry. Um, and we teach, for the most part, we teach the CPE class in person. That's the supervision class that goes with the internship. And people do their internship at one of these locations. But outside of the New York City area, we have an online class, supervision class, and then we can also make a clinical, what's called a clinical site placement agreement with any location outside of the New York City area, as long as they agree to the terms that are necessary for hosting an intern. We also have the option, or I should say, you have the option of taking any ACPE accredited CPE program. It doesn't have to be JTS's program for this component of the master's. So I want to just explain that a little bit, because I know that the field has its own language and a terminology and structure. There are about 400 centers for clinical pastoral education around the country that are accredited by our accrediting agency, ACPE. So when you heard Johanna talk earlier, she has done her CPE at a local CPE center in her home community. And because it's ACPE accredited, we'll accept that at JTS. So if you have the interest in doing that sort of approach to the internship, we can help you find a location. We can't guarantee that we can find a location for you, or that you would receive an offer of a placement, but we can help you navigate the field and identify where you could do that. But then the other option, if you're not local to New York, is you take our CPE class, you apply to our program, and then we work with you to help you secure a location in your local community. Now, it does require some work on your part, because we're not local, throughout the country. But we do have a network of colleagues, and the organization, like I said, has 400 sites throughout the country, as well as many, many more locations could serve that clinical placement role. Okay, I'm going to continue, but like I said, if you have questions, please hold on to them, and we'll open up for some questions. Here's a few pictures from our retreats that we've had in New York thus far. I'm going to just share a few highlights. We went to the Center for Jewish History in New York City. We saw an exhibit which has actually been extended because it's been so popular, on Anne Frank's diary. We then had a meeting with a psychologist, Carol Gilligan, who has been very influential in the field of psychology. And not many people know she wrote about Anne Frank's diary. So we had a session with her, and she's very excited actually about our program, because listening is a core component to the work she's done in psychology. So we're really grateful that she's been a part of our program. We go out for dinner or lunch at some nice restaurants, and there's some really great kosher restaurants in New York. Sometimes that's just a little fun. And then we also had some presentations at each of our retreats thus far on the history and the varieties of different prayers. Well, we focused on Jewish prayers, but we've also had some presentation on prayers from other faith groups as well, but different prayers for healing. And then we had a wonderful visit to the JTS Rare Book Room, in which we were able to see manuscripts from different prayer books from hundreds and even 1,000 years ago from the Cairo Geniza and other locations. So as you can see, like this all weaves together what I was talking about before in terms of an embodied experience, an intellectual experience, and a heartfelt experience. So you also heard about the capstones, the fourth component of the program. So for the capstone, which happens towards the end of your experience at JTS in the program, you have options for what kind of capstone you want. And there's, for the most part, 3 broad categories of options. So one is an academic paper. Sometimes people have written a theoretical paper, or they've done a study of religious thought or religious texts. And also sometimes they've done some research in which they conduct interviews with people. JTS does have an IRB, an internal review board. And so we also teach people about the ethics of research, and which is also just good to know if you're going into chaplaincy, since there is research in the field of chaplaincy. The second option is to do a creative project, and some people have done artwork. I believe someone this year is writing poetry, so it's the creative production, the creative expression as the focus of the project. And if a person chooses a creative project, they also write a brief paper in which they describe the rationale for their project. And the third option is to develop a professional tool, by which we mean something you can take with you or use in your work, your service as a chaplain or a spiritual caregiver. So sometimes people have created prayer services for particular chaplaincy contexts, or a prayer service that has a certain focus from a pastoral care perspective. So an example of this would be to create a 1-hour Rosh Hashanah service for a nursing home, because there aren't going to be 6-hour services in certain contexts. But it also could be something like creating spiritual care cards, something that I remember working with a colleague who was a photographer, and so I guess this is both a creative project and a professional tool, but he created these beautiful cards that then had either prayers or words for meditation to help people, or intentions. Probably created about 20 of these, and then produced them and was able to distribute them. Certification is a whole big topic, but what we want to just impress on you is that this master's degree was developed in conversation with the professional associations, which either accredit our CPE program, or organizations which certify people as chaplains. And we've linked our coursework and, of course, our internship to meet different areas of that process. Now, it is important to know that you need to talk with the organization directly if you would like to be board certified, to find out about the totality of what you would need for board certification, because this degree won't provide all of it, but it will contribute to it. And that's something that we in the program are here to support you and to be resources to help you develop a plan to to use this program toward that process, if that's your aspiration, and also to help you navigate. So just for example, if you already have graduate education in another field, these organizations will count some of that. So the combination of our master's degree and your prior graduate education should provide either all of the requirements for the educational part of certification or should provide a significant amount, which you could then add more to if you need. It's very individualized, and so that's why part of what we provide is advisement as well as helping you navigate the field.
Naomi, there
Yeah.
are a few questions in the chat, and I know
Oh,
so I
yeah.
just wanted to make sure that there was time for that
Yeah.
too.
Why don't I pause then, and let's take a few questions, and then I can just mention the last few slides.
So one
Okay.
of the questions is, how is Judaism incorporated into the curriculum for those who are interested?
So our coursework has significant components which provide education from Jewish religion, Jewish tradition, Jewish texts. So in our curriculum, we provide a combination of Jewish groundedness in subject matter, as well as some introduction to caring for people from diverse backgrounds. And part of the way we think about this is to enter the field, whether or not you become board certified, it's helpful to see what the field cares about as is expressed in board certification. So people need to have a sense of their own religious or spiritual grounding. And at the Jewish Theological Seminary, we're well equipped to provide a Jewish orientation and Jewish groundedness. So, Jewish texts, Jewish traditions. I'm thinking like we have a course on death, dying, and bereavement, which draws really heavily on Jewish approaches to end of life and to caring for people at end of life as well as in bereavement. So that's an example. But we also have a class that's called Caring Across Difference, which looks at a variety of different ways, a variety of different areas of diversity, because the field also, to become a board certified chaplain, one also needs to demonstrate a competency to make human connection across difference, to be able to be supportive of people emotionally from different backgrounds, as well as to support people in their own religious and cultural background and perspectives, which doesn't mean that one necessarily does a different tradition's religious rituals, but it means that we have some understanding and sensitivity and can help support them from that perspective. I just want to ask Patrick
Oh,
or Kaylin, do one of you want to say anything more about that?
no, I was going to jump in on one of the next questions that was
Okay,
asked.
why don't you jump in then?
Sure. So, the question was, are the retreats twice a year, or how often are the retreats and are they mandatory? And I said they're generally twice a year and mandatory, but I also wanted to talk about the length of them, that they're just 3 days long, and didn't know if you wanted to say anything, yeah, in regards to that question.
Yeah, I think whenever there's a mandatory component like this in a program, if there's a significant hardship that would be created, there's always an openness to having a discussion. But these are becoming mandatory parts of the program for which we could have a discussion if it was difficult to attend.
Thanks.
Okay.
And then there was a question. Oh, sorry.
You
Okay,
got
there
it.
was a question about what kind of supervision or support exists in the CPE unit.
Do you want to take that one?
Sure, sure. So, um, a good amount of support. So, you do learn in CPE in a cohort of about six, say typically six peers. So, it's a small group of six peers that meets with the educator either once a week or twice a week, depending on whether you're doing a summer intensive or a more extended program, but you meet regularly with your educator. You have supervision sessions, which is one-on-one with your educator. It's about process, your experiences at your clinical site, to talk about what you're learning, how you're experiencing everything. Um, and then at your clinical site, you also have a preceptor who supports you as you're doing the clinical work. So you're supported both at the clinical site and regularly in your learning cohort for the internship. It's all of the learning in CPE is relational and done like in partnership, and it's never our intention to throw you out there without any support.
These are great questions. I know we're just about 2 minutes before our concluding time, so I would like to make a couple final comments from the slides, and I'm also happy to stay on for a few minutes after if there's more questions or anyone would like to stay. So um, So on the website, you can find information about advanced standing in the program. So let's not spend some time, but just know that there are some ways to have advanced standing if that's of interest. What I largely wanted to mention, and please be in touch with us if you have some confusion. You might recall that a little bit ago, I was talking about the electives and that you could do another CPE as your electives, or you could take 2 more courses. It's good to just understand, just when you consider this program, that we offer a significant reduction in the cost of the credits when you do the CPE. So the program is the fee structure is for this year, it's $1,810 per credit. That's across JTS. And so when you take a 3-credit course or 6 credits for the semester, you can do the math for what that would come to. For CPE, we issue 6 credits, but we just charge $1,000, which is a pretty typical CPE fee. Remember, I said most CPE programs are in hospitals and other places. When you think about the different options for whether to take 6 courses and 2 CPE units or 8 courses and 1 CPE unit, they do come to a different financial total. So we're happy to review this with you if this is confusing. You also can make the decision for which option you'd like to pursue once you're in the program. You don't need to know that ahead of time. Also, in terms of the cost of the program, there are multiple other costs, as is typical in academic programs. There's a student support fee, which is actually only if you're in person. JTS has a counseling session, which is actually quite a robust counseling session as counseling service, but it's only if you're if you're local and if you're in person for your classes. There's a health fee. There's some other fees. So we won't go through all of these, but the things you would typically want to factor in, like housing and food and personal expenses. And I have a few different sample ways of looking at schedules and looking at costs. And so you can follow up with us if you'd like to review those. And the final question, which we always get asked, is about financial aid. So I've just mentioned that we have a significant reduction of the cost for the CPE component. So this is a 30-credit degree, and for a private institution, it has this cost reduction it's not as expensive as most 30-credit programs would be. This program does qualify people for federal loans. I believe you need to be enrolled in at least 6 credits in order to qualify. When people participate in the New York City CPE internship program, we do have funding from many local agencies and some of our clinical sites to provide some scholarships for that portion of the program. And then we encourage people to look in their own networks or local community to see what other kinds of scholarships might be available. In terms of applying for the program, you can find the application on the JTS website. You can also write to Reverend Milazzo or to myself from the Center for Pastoral Education. And you also can write to the admissions department at JTS if you just write to admissions@jtsa.edu. You can also learn more about our CPE program by looking up the portion of the website that's dedicated to the CPE program. So that concludes the slides. I think there is another question. And so it's Ellie. Thank you so much. So I think we've come to the conclusion, and I'd like to thank all of you for being here with us. And like I said, I'll stay on for a few more minutes if any of you want to stay and have anything else you'd like to talk about. But otherwise, please be in touch, and we would really love to hear from you. And any questions you have or anything we can elaborate on, we would love to have that conversation with you.